about all these things on my show and how to help them.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to Mental Melodies. This is your host, Carmynn Bradley. What's the day today? February 6th, 2024. And you know what I don't understand? I don't really understand long nails. I've always been a short nail girl. For a while, I would go to get my nails done, and I would tell the people that I was a writer, and I am, but I would type all the time. That's the point. And so I would tell them they had to be really, really short, and especially when I got acrylics. I wanted them to be really, really short, but I hate to be that person that just doesn't understand long nails, but I guess the type of person I am, I just see long nails as being like a big encumbrance, like how do you pick things up? Like there's no way that I could type with long nails. There's no way that I could get anything done. And yeah, that was just a little joke that I wanted to start with. In all seriousness, today has been interesting. I started the day feeling pretty down and like kind of tired, and today is both the 1 month anniversary of my dog's death, and also it's his birthday, and he would have been 9 years old today, and you all know that he's not here with us, but I've been kind of in this mode since, I don't know, like the beginning of the year or whatever, but I've just been really, really going kind of slow, and I've been feeling this motivation to get out and kind of like push the ball forward and get the ball rolling, and I have been feeling like maybe I'm getting stuck in kind of a depression here. My friends and I have been talking a lot about winter and leaning into the season of winter, and I feel like to some extent at some point maybe I got a little lost there, and I was using it as maybe like a little bit of a crutch where I was like, well, it's winter, so I shouldn't be doing anything, and then I catch myself like in bed a lot longer. It's a lot harder to get up in the morning, and it's interesting that when I'm able to like kind of take a step out and see myself from the outside, I start to notice things like that. And I've definitely talked about like being able to recognize when you're in a moment that maybe you want to get out of, and that's kind of how I've been feeling, I guess. And today I was like, man, I'm in a moment where I want to get out of it. But now that I'm saying that, I realized that this morning I was sad, and I definitely had a reason to be sad, and I need to give myself grace. I've talked about this before, to be able to like have those moments. So sometimes it's hard to tell, like, is this a giant moment in time and I need to be worried about it, or is this just a little moment in time and I can just kind of lean into it? And I think that that's what this morning was. It was just kind of a moment, and I needed to lean into it, and I needed to be sad for a bit. But I guess I catch myself like judging myself, and then I notice all these like other thoughts start to pop up. I remember a couple episodes ago I was talking about this, and I'm thinking about this book that I was reading called either Resilience for Actors. No, that's one of them that I've been reading that's related to this idea, but I've been listening to the podcast Untethered Soul, and I've mentioned this. And in Untethered Soul, he talks about mental illness and how you can kind of recognize it. And I remember a few episodes back, I mentioned like intrusive thoughts, and I think I mentioned it in a sidebar, so I want to make that more of a longer thing right now, where I talk about symptoms of mental illness and when you can notice them, and specifically like how to heal yourself. So I'm going to do another little sidebar where I go back and talk about this last Saturday I presented at Zen Bar, which is put on by LV Yoga Therapy. My good friend Stephanie Jillian and her business partner Michelle, they own this company, and it is, oh my gosh, it's just excellent. They put on so many different events, and they're all about holistic wellness and healing. And so I presented last Saturday, and I had this weird moment. It's so interesting. I'm thinking now about how like moments they could be short, they could be long. Like, you think about a different period of time in your life feels like a big moment. Like I feel like in a way I'm starting a new moment right now, because I kind of like changed my hair. I'm trying a new lipstick color. Like June's not in my life anymore. There's all these things that have changed, just like new budding things. And that was a sidebar. The point was I was presenting, and I was trying to prepare for this presentation, and it like, oh man, there's just Duality. I talk about duality all the time. If you don't know that I'm not about duality, then you must be new. So, welcome to the show. I have this thing where I'm always trying to balance like being a hard worker with being like lazy or trying to cut corners slash like being in the moment and leaning into who I am. And I've been learning a lot about how like why I love improv, for example, because I think that to go back to what I was saying in the beginning about depression, like depression is inaction. And I think that when it's a problem, it's inaction for a very long time, you know? So that's why I start to get worried about it because I remember being in therapy, and when I started to feel depressed, I'd be able to, eventually I was able to articulate to my therapist, like, I'm feeling depressed right now, you can see the signs. And then it's like, okay, so now that you know, how do you respond? So going back to like this morning, I believe that I needed to take some time to be sad. I went to the gym, but I took the day slowly. I got crickets from my frogs, so I'm standing in Petco and I'm seeing reminders of my little dog, and it's making me kind of sad, you know. But then I get home and I start prepping for the show, and I start adding new color into my hair, and people reach out to me to support me, and like I reach out to a couple of friends, and suddenly I'm feeling connected, and then I move on from the moment. And it was just kind of like a beautiful thing where I was able to lean into that. So I'm in thinking about being me and wanting to be in the moment, I wanted to write out this whole speech, you know, and like memorize it and know what my punchline was going to be and how I was going to start. And I think back to when I actually started to become a public speaker. I was actually very young, and this is a part of my story that I think I haven't told yet. And I think it's because when I think about narrative therapy and I think about like the shift from I tell the bad side of my story to I begin to start to see the good, today feels kind of like that, where it's like I can see how you need all of it, and I can see how today was a day where I learned that lesson about sadness again. But I feel like I'm starting to pull the really good parts from the story that really tell, like, I don't know, the story of who I am and who I had a tendency to be and who I was going to become. And there's like the story of the trauma and all the things that like knocked me down and all of that. And that's beautiful too. And they're both the same story, but you can tell your story with an emphasis on the darkness, and you can also tell your story with an emphasis on the light. And so in this period of time right now, which I've mentioned before, where I am like collecting on seeds that I've planted, and I am you know, like actually benefiting from my manifestation and still looking forward, but being in the moment and learning all of those lessons, I'm able to see more of the parts of my story that were like bright and that really showed like who Carmynn was, you know? And so like this speech I always think about that I did back when I think I must have been like 18 or 19. I don't know. I got into college because a foster care, foundation helped me out. It was called Promises to Kids. They're located in San Diego. One of the owners, Stephanie, also her name is also Stephanie. Anyway, if my friend Stephanie Jillian, if you're ever watching, that she would understand that moment, because we talk about those things where you start to see like patterns in life, and like how different angels and people that come into your life often have like the same name, or they have like similarities, and you start to like see these patterns throughout your life. So speaking of patterns, public speaking has been a pattern of mine for a long time, starting with that. And I gave this whole speech at an anti-domestic violence campaign sponsorship dinner sort of thing. And it was like a really fancy dinner, and I was just like a kid fresh out of high school trying to figure things out. But that period of time in my life was a time when I was very I was like trying to recreate myself, but I was also very stuck. There's this, interesting. I'm just realizing, like, again, where kind of like the opposites started, or maybe it's always been that way. But before college, I remember I wanted like a different last name, and I wanted to walk away from my story. Like, I didn't want my stepdad to be a part of my life. I was like, I finally got out, blah, blah, blah. And I like jumped into college, and I started to identify by a different last name. It was like a foster family that I had. And then my whole story and journey led to eventually getting my own dad's last name back, because he was not in my life when I was growing up. And so that's a big part of my story, is like becoming Carmynn Bradley. And it's interesting because like Carmynn Bradley is who I am, and the more steps that I take into being that person, like if I think about when I first decided to file the papers to change my last name from the last name that I had as a kid to the last name that I had now, it's like now I'm so many steps into that journey that like I don't even question it anymore. Like I'm Carmynn Bradley, that's what people know me as, that feels right to me. And the first time I started that, the first time I got that name back, it was my last year of teaching high school, and it was so important to me at that time to be able to be Miss Bradley instead of Miss Kreitz. That was my old last name, and I might as well just say it because when I'm telling this story, I think about how like I didn't want to identify as that when I went into college, but interestingly enough, like people kind of have been popping up from my past lately, and like I went to a birthday party at my sister's house, so I ran into somebody from high school. So it's like obviously I was that person, and there was nothing wrong with that person either. And even though I had a last name that I didn't like and I was associated with a person that I didn't like, again going back to like being able to see the light in my story, I can see how even though I had that name, and even though I had a lot of trauma, and even though there was all this illness associated, like that person has always been me. And so I'm thinking about something I've mentioned before about really like loving your past selves and really channeling parts of you that just had I don't know, channeling different parts of you. I've talked about this before. That's just like an afterthought. So anyway, I sure you noticed that I started with a joke, and so I think the end to this particular segment is to finish up what I was saying about the speech I gave last Saturday, which was very, very short, and I had initially wanted to give this whole speech about perception, and it's so if you were tuning into last week's episode, I was like, yeah, I'm going to talk about the chakras, and then I like didn't talk about them. I only talked about them to reference the fact that I knew that I was supposed to be talking about them, but I wasn't. And so I had this realization when I was preparing for last Saturday that I was like, I'm a comedian. That's like who I am. And, you know, I have these like different sides of me, but I love like being in the moment, and I love preparation also, but I needed to give myself grace to just be like, it wasn't even that big of a deal. Like it was just a Saturday with a friend. Like, let me just go up and say what needs to be said. And so I gave myself some talking points, and I knew what my punchline was kind of going to be, and that was it. And then I jumped into it and gave myself permission to like do better, you know. And that's something I've also talked about, is just like giving yourself permission to kind of start over. And I think that that's how I was feeling this morning. Like I'm feeling kind of sad about June, but I'm getting up and I'm moving slowly, and I got a coffee and I went to the gym, and here I am talking to you, and I'm starting to feel better, and like I don't have to be sad all day. And I gave homage, you know, to a life that I loved that is no longer here. And yeah, so let's take a little break, and I will see you back in a couple minutes.
Hi, I'm Deacon T with Modern Word Ministries. It's great to be with you today. Just a short little promo for our show. Every Sunday morning we have service, and you can follow us at 10 a.m. Pacific time on modernwordministries.org. And if you missed us or you want to see some of our older messages, go ahead and check us out on socialmediashows.com every single morning at 9 a.m. It's a great way to kick off your day, get a little bit of the word in you, get something uplifting, get you started off on your way. You know, if you're looking for prayer or you need some help, reach out to us. If you go to our website, again, that's modernwordministries.org, you can interact with me via telephone, via DM, text message, whatever you want. I'll get right back to you. So if you need prayer, you need help, you just need somebody to talk to, Modern Word Ministries is here for you. We are your church in the community. So until you see you next time, be blessed, everybody. Bye-bye.
Got Films is a full-service production company that provides motion picture quality content and production services for use in the film and TV industry. Looking for a seasoned crew, high-quality equipment, or other production services for your film, TV, commercial, corporate convention, sports, news, or interview project? Your search stops here. Some of our projects include NASCAR, American Restoration, Pawn Stars, Counting Cars, Top Chef, BattleBots, Forge and Fire, and Street Outlaws. We have also produced over 60 feature films and documentaries. We're ready for all your needs. Whatever your project, whatever your budget, big or small, Got Films got you. GotFilms.com.
Hi everyone, welcome back. This is your host Carmynn Bradley, second segment here of Mental Melodies. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for just being a part of the growth of this show. Continue to please just like and subscribe and share. That was something that that'd be cool, I think, to just dive into this a little more and kind of share what I was talking about on Saturday, because there were some topics that, part of the reason that I couldn't decide on what to say is because, by now you know that I can ramble on about these things for the rest of my life. Like, just put a camera in front of me and I'll talk until I die. Anyway, I was talking about like my gifts and my voice, and I think this is really when some of that stuff came up that I mentioned today about like looking back on that speech that I gave. Then I was just like, I'm going to say what needs to be said. I'm going to write a speech and do it. Like, that's what you do in school. A teacher says you're going to do a speech. I was never one to be like, I don't want to do that. I was just like, that's the assignment. Like, I'll do the assignment. So anyway, I was given this opportunity to speak, and I remember getting an offer from a woman. She owned a publicity company or something, and she was like, you're a public speaker, like, I'm going to bring you on, contact me. And I never contacted her. And again, I was a kid and I finished college and I became a teacher and all these other things. But that card meant a lot to me at that time, because it was like, here's I believe I could call it a talent, because I have skills, I have things that I've decided to do and I've worked at them. But this was like, I was a kid and I went up and I did a thing and people were like, you can do that thing. And I feel like lately I've been able to kind of just like identify those things that come naturally to me, and then also just find that balance of the hard work that also goes into it. Like learning to be a professional speaker is different from going up and being a kid, and just saying what needs to be said. And so that's been a fun little balance for me. So when I was talking on Saturday, I had planned on doing this whole thing about perception, and then I was going to talk about trauma and how it like essentially covers the eyes, and that's been a thing that's been, I guess, like popping up for me in my life lately, is like learning this lesson, and it's kind of a hard lesson to learn, and I do this often. I haven't done this yet today, but I feel like I need to slow down a little bit so that I can like really dive into this topic for a second, because I know I go back to that story about the speech. I know I can feel it in my brain. I'll go back there. But right now I want to talk about this and how important it is to understand, because I think like for people like me who, again, and I've done this a bunch of times on the show, I've thrown out like, gosh, at least 7 mental illnesses that I'm like, I have that one. So you guys are probably all thinking like, she probably does have one, but it's not all of those. But I'm reminded of a story that I was thinking about earlier. It was a rainy day and I was like getting in the process of moving from the last place that I was in, and I was getting rid of a lot of books, and I've talked about how getting rid of my books was so difficult for me, because such a big part of my identity. But one of the biggest books that I had, that I actually wrote a paper on when I was teaching high school, and I had them write papers about a book that they felt like really impacted the world. I believe that books have the power to change the way a society thinks about something. Like the bell jar is an example that's related to this thing I'm talking about right now, about my perception. And what I was saying was, for someone like me who has tendencies like borderline personality disorder, this was going to be the thing that I was going to specialize in when I was like, I'm going to be a mental health therapist in the state of Nevada, because borderline personality disorder leads to angry outbursts, substance abuse, lack of longevity in relationships. It's probably like one of the worst ones, at least in my opinion, because it's so intense, and it's like you don't have to, but you find yourself jumping from thing to thing, from person to person, from relationship to relationship. And to some extent, this is a good part of my story. I like that I was a teacher, and then I became this, and then I became that, and that's a whole part of my story. However, I also know that had I been healthier, back in the day, I might have still taught for 8 years, but I might have been able to teach in one school or something like that, you know. But I had a few clients with borderline personality disorder, and so I believe that I'm able to say, like, for one thing, these people came into my life for a reason. I believe that people are mirrors. I'm just starting to reread the 4 Agreements. Take notes today, guys. There's lots of books on my list. I just started rereading the 4 Agreements, and I bought it. I just donated it to Goodwill a few months ago, and here I am, just like collecting books again. I'm going to have all of them again, and I'm going to have that big library that I've always wanted. But anyway, I've been rereading the 4 Agreements, and it's a book about Toltec tradition, about people that knew that we were all God, that we're connected, that we're all one. And essentially it's a theory about the ego. And he was saying, he uses languages like we're all in a dream, and there's society's dream, and we're told what to do. And this is kind of what I talked about in my song, like, What is Life Anyway? Like, life is about everything. Like, you have to feel everything. I think the purpose of life is simply to experience life. Like, we are God in a human body experiencing life. And so in the 4 Agreements, he talks about this, and this relates to, oh man, I'm like in 5 different directions and I don't know where to go. Oh my goodness. Anyway, I'm just going to lean into it. This idea of perception has obviously come up in all of these different books, right? And so I'm thinking of, like, here's the bell jar, here's the 4 Agreements, here's the untethered soul, here's the resilience for actors, and all of these things are showing me this lesson that I'm needing to learn right now about perception, right? And how I see things, and how perception is related to, like, who I am, for example, and my story. Like, bell jar literature is, I mean, a lot of these books that I mention on this show are nonfiction, like self-helpy books, but a lot of the stuff that I've learned has come from fiction. And like in the bell jar, this is, I don't know if it wasn't supposed to be, I don't think, about borderline personality disorder per se, but it's a woman who, like, starts to see, like, all of these men in her life as being, like, potential partners, and she can never just, like, commit to one, and she's worried about, like, her art and her identity. And then there's scenes where she's in mental institutions, and a lot of these things I've, like, related to, you know. But one thing I've said on the show that I've been grappling with, like, identifying with a particular belief, because I talk about how a lot of my theories, like, need to develop, and so I'll throw out a theory sometimes, but it still needs time to grow. But, like, I guess I have, I still can't say, like, this is a definitive thing that I believe that all mental illness comes from trauma, because if it does, then that would mean that you could heal from it 100%, right? If bipolarity, for example, which is something that I've dappled with this argument on this show, that bipolarity is, like, in your genes and you can't change it. I think to ground myself in that argument, and to, like, give my uncle credit for the fact that he believes in that, JD, Joshua Dagan, local author, look him up, excellent, genius. He believes, right, that if you can sense bipolarity from a young childhood, then you can have treatment earlier on, you know. Then you don't have to have these things happen where you're going from relationship to relationship and you don't have a lot of stability in your life, because you'll be grounded. I would argue from a spiritual standpoint, which is something that did come up on Saturday, that, like, we carry generational trauma. We carry trauma from our mothers, from our grandmothers, right? Like, as a woman, that's the language I use. And so yes, it is in our genetics, but I've argued on this show that there are things that we can do to change our genes. Like, imagine being able to heal ourselves and therefore heal all of the stuff that we got from our mothers and grandmothers also, and to, like, be able to heal the planet. That's, like, what it's really about. And so that's what I was talking about on Saturday when I was struggling with, like, I only have 5 minutes and I got to give a speech about perception. Like, bro, that's not enough time. And so I came to the conclusion that I was just there to test a joke on some people and introduce myself. And I was like, I'm here for this. Like, I guess part of the struggle came from, like, I'm not a therapist anymore, but here I am. Saturday was, like, an event for networking for people who are, like, healing people. And I was like, I don't heal people anymore. Like, I just, like, say funny things and play my guitar. Like, I just want to be happy. I'm not helping anybody, but that is 100% not true. And I've talked about this on this show. Like, I genuinely believe, and I've always believed, that I was going to go from teaching to something else where I could share the story that I always wanted to share when I was a kid. And even back then, I was like, there has to be a reason for this. You know, we're always trying to, I've used this word, it's not a real word, but again, Stephanie and I were talking about it, logify things, because we always want to analyze, and that's what we're taught to do in school. So we're taught to think about things and observe things, and we're a very like knowledge-driven society, which, you know, I've said kind of worked out for me for a bit, but I think that we've lost a lot of the creativity in our society. So while we're taught to analyze things, we're not necessarily taught to just feel things or, you know, to grow our intuition. And yeah, and I think, like, going along with what I was kind of saying on Saturday about the conclusion I was trying to come to on Saturday about, like, who I am and how I fit into the healing community, like, how can I essentially combine my past, but my experiences and my education. Like, I want to use the stuff that I learned, because I didn't necessarily get degrees just to become the things I wanted to become. I always loved the classes that I was taking. Like, I loved learning about our school system and how it's changed over the course of years. And I loved, when I was a teacher, I loved reading the books. And when I was in school, that's why I decided to become a literature and writing major, because I just loved reading and I love learning and I love that natural process of learning. So again, like, just going back to what I was saying, I was thinking a lot about, like, what I have to offer, and again, like, what do I have to give? So what I started with on Saturday is I said, hi, my name's Carmynn Bradley. And I said, well, now I can't even remember it, but I was talking about how I had nothing to offer, because that's kind of how I felt. So I was like, hey, I'm just here. And I told a story about my brother. And oh man, I need to slow down again. But I was talking about my brother. This is like a big part of my story. It's been coming up a lot lately since I started acting, because it's just, I think, probably the most traumatic thing that's ever happened to me, which is ironic because, like, it happened to my brother, but it happened to me, and it happened to my mom, and it happened to my sister, and, like, 100% it altered the course of my life, you know? And, like, so I was talking about how he was young. He died young. He will always be 17 in my memories. Like, he will never be older than that. Or 18. Gosh, I feel like such a bad sister, but I can never remember if he was almost 18 or 18, because I remember when I used to tell the story, that was such a big thing where it was like, he was only this young, you know? And so then I just sometimes only remember it as being that. But he used to joke on, like, Christmas, or Christmas, I guess, is the present holiday, but he would say, like, my presence is your present. And it was a funny joke. And eventually, when he did get a job, he spoiled us. And he was just that way, like, so giving and loving. And anyway, so I brought that up because I came to this conclusion that, like, the best way for me to give back is to be me. Like, be the way that my brother was. Be a light in the room, you know? If I'm a speaker, be a speaker. If I'm funny, be funny. If I want to sing, sing. And through all of that, that will be more for the world than anything else that I could ever do. So I'm going to take a little bit of a break. See you back in a couple minutes.
Hello, everyone. This is Joseph Skoda with Social Media Shows. Well, I thank all of you for your support through these last several years, and it's been a lot of fun. We've given people a voice they never had before. Now, Social Media Shows is always collaborating with our veterans to help them do things and help out the veterans who are struggling today. And we teamed up with GI Connections, connecting veterans with resources. So please consider helping and donating to this great cause, because we're always doing things for veterans. So GI Connections, Social Media Shows, and you is what makes the world a better place. Once again, Joseph Skoda, proud United States Air Force veteran.
Traditional TV is going away. Hollywood is starting to fade. People are demanding real stories from real people. Our voices are now being heard in our own way. podcasts, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok Live are becoming the norm. Internet TV has now reached the highest demand in human history. Social media shows is now the new media of the century.
Hi everyone, welcome back. We're at the third segment here of the show of Mental Melodies with your host, me, Carmynn Bradley. I've been basically just ranting about myself for a good long time, but it feels good. I always say that. I get on this show and it feels good. And I think again, I just need to lean into it. Because what happens, like in the break, my mind's kind of racing and I'm like, what comes next, you know? But today a lot less so, and it's funny because I talk about microcosms a lot on this show and how like I see these patterns, and so I've talked about before how my mind has been quieter lately, like in general, you know, and that's just, it's, I guess going back to how I started, like I was talking about observing thoughts, and I brought up a few of the books that have been kind of teaching me this lesson about how to heal mental illness. Like I think if let's say the first symptom that you see are intrusive thoughts, and this is not the only symptom that you could follow, right? Like I could talk about the fatigue and all these other symptoms I was seeing. Sometimes it's hard when there are so many to like nail in on one, but it's good to just pick one thing. I've mentioned how that's how I got started, was like picking one word a day for a while, and then it became one word a week and then one word a month, and I have not been able to nail down one word a year, but I've kind of also just steered away from that as a project. But if you can find one thing and you can decide I'm going to focus on this for a good long time, that's how you build a habit. So let's say like your habit right now, or the thing you want to incorporate, something new, is like observing your thoughts. Then you're going to start to see patterns in those thoughts. And so the conclusion, I don't know, the thing that I was going to say on Saturday, like about perception, had to do with trauma. And so I was mentioning earlier that I have been dealing with this lately because it's hard to, sometimes it's hard to admit when we find out that like a thought or a behavior or something that we're doing, that if it comes from trauma, then you can heal from it. And so the next step then is to have like self accountability, to be able to say, I see that maybe you're, I don't want to use this term right now, but we talk about toxic behavior, right? So I'm trying not to write things out into the universe that I don't believe about myself, unless I'm doing it in a joking way, because that's healing. But I'm not going to say like I'm a toxic person. I don't want to identify as that, but I think that's something people can like, they start to mix that up. There's a difference between being a toxic person and like having toxic things. And you have toxic things, then again, you can walk away from those, like you can heal from them, right? So I'm talking about like, even if you, and again, to validate what Joshua Dagan was saying about like bipolarity or mental illness, like any of these things that I've mentioned, if they come from childhood, then we start to feel like we can't change them, you know? And so the same thing applies to the stuff that's been coming up for me. Like if I just start to say like these are just things that I have, then I'm limiting myself, because then I'm not taking a step back and acknowledging that I might have responsibility for things that are popping up for me, you know? And so it takes a long time to get there. And like I've been so grateful lately, like over the course of the last maybe 6 months, you could say, for these like symptoms that I've had, which sounds a little silly, but I think that's part of the healing process. Like I think I've reached a point where I'm a little less for one thing, I can't ever go back to a certain space that I've been. There's a difference between like, okay, so let's say I relapse, that's the word people use, right? When they go from like taking steps forward away from a mental illness, we'll say that because addiction is part of that, you know, and then they just fall, and they fall hard, and they crumble, and then they're not in control anymore. Like that, you can use that word and you can use that phrase for any kind of mental illness. I think when you're taking steps forward, you can always like go back, and I think obviously for addiction, it's so much more intense, because it's like once you taste it, then you just keep tasting it. And that's kind of how it is. Like for depression, you can be like addicted to Saturday or negative thoughts. So you just start to fall. I will never fall back as far as I've fallen before. I've talked about this before on the show. It's like once you start to take a step forward in your journey, like the ball's gonna keep rolling. And sometimes the ball stops. And I think that's when like you have an opportunity to visit with an emotion. Maybe you have a wall in front of you. That's an opportunity for you. Maybe it's just to rest. And I think that's the thing that I was mentioning earlier about like being depressed in the morning. I'm like, am I really in a depressive state? Do I need to be worried that I'm going to be depressed all winter or something? Or can I really just rest? Can I really just not do things until March? And I'm not saying not do anything, but like genuinely slow down for these months without that worry. I think a lot of the worry of inaction is where we start to problematize depression, because Jim Carrey talks about this, or at least I showed a clip in class one time about depression. If you take the word apart, it means deep rest. Depression is deep rest. So if you're feeling, I'm feeling depressed right now, and let me identify what it is. Depression, at least for me, I used to describe it as kind of like there's like a wall on top of you, and it's like you can't really get up and you're stuck. And so you kind of feel like maybe you're in a box, or there's all these different metaphors I have for it. When I was teaching yoga, I talked a lot about like, grapes being pressed in order to become wine, and like butterflies have to be in a cocoon. So there's this whole like image that you probably have now in your minds of like any time when you felt really, really pressed. Well, let me argue that like what you need to do in those moments is lean into that. Do you always have the freedom to do that? No. And that's where there's a problem in our society, right? Like when I was diagnosed with lupus, which again, and especially being inspired by a few people I met this weekend, like I do believe that my lupus came from trauma. So despite the fact it's like an autoimmune disease that people talk about in our society, Selena Gomez has it, so therefore like it validates what I'm going through. But I would argue that while I might have symptoms that you could tie to lupus, maybe for the rest of my life, I don't think I will, but I think that, they'll pop up and they'll pop up and they'll pop up. Eventually they'll go away. But when I was diagnosed with lupus, I didn't really want it to go away, right? When we think about the addiction that I was talking about, like not just of substances, but of feelings, of emotions, of things that make us feel safe, like lupus in a way, what it did is it validated what I was going through at the time. And it almost validated it more so than like the mental illness diagnoses that I got, because the mental illness diagnoses come with shame. They come with like, I'm the girl who's been depressed, like I'm the girl who tried to kill herself, I'm the girl who like was really cool in high school and then I became a whole hot mess. And that's what mental illness came with. Lupus was more like it was an illness. It was a physical illness. When you have a physical illness, people go, oh no, like, are you okay? And there's a little bit more of that. Not forever, because people get tired of doing that when you're sick for a really long time. But at least like for me, it empowered me to get better, because it is a physical thing. It's in the tangible world, and we separate the two when they're not separate. Like, and how is it that doctors didn't, I think one doctor eventually started to hint at like, there's a relationship between these two things. But at that time, I was still kind of addicted to that lupus diagnosis, and I didn't want to hear it, because if something stems from trauma, you can heal it. We know how to do it. You go into your memories and you wipe out the emotions, or you do a lot of yoga and you get stuff out of your body. Like there's things that you can do to feel healthy again, and again, I was saying like, even for those that start in early childhood, like that's generational trauma. Where we again have a problem in society is that, well, then what do you do? I don't know, I'm going on a tangent right now. I don't think that's relevant, but anyway, there's this power that you have once you start to identify things, and you're able to notice what it is that you need to heal from. I'm drawing a blank. I'm in a wall. Maybe I need to rest. I remember what I was going to say after, so Jim Carrey, when he mentioned that thing about deep rest, right? My mind I had a little thought then that I didn't have time to visit with, about how, so like my deep rest happened. I did mention, I guess I mentioned lupus, and I said that I felt like I didn't really have the chance to rest then. But I guess to tie in this whole thing about like childhood trauma is that I don't think that I would have had to take like a 5-year long nap like had I been okay as a kid, you know what I mean? And so I think that's where we can start to see how, like, I don't know, I think that people who haven't been through the kind of depression that I have been through, maybe I can help people to understand it by giving you the example of this morning. This morning, was I depressed? Let's say yes. Let's say we're going to label it that big, deep, dark word, depression. You know, it's like Voldemort. Like, I'm just naming it, maybe that it'll take away its power a little bit. Because, you know, if I had ignored the fact that my dog had just died and I had, like, gotten up and pushed through the feeling of tiredness that I had and, like, forced myself to do things, then, like, that would build up in my body. And then I you know, eventually that would lead to illness. Like, this grief that I had about June would turn into that image I mention all the time about, like, you know, this bog filled with like dirt and all that stuff. That's what I think of when you have like sadness that doesn't get tended to. You know, sadness just starts to like drown, and then there's all these like gross, ugly things growing out of it, and that's just an image or a metaphor for, like, eventually that sadness will turn to kidney disease. And I know that jump sounds a little crazy, but that's truly it, right? And I've mentioned it before, kidney disease was a part of my lupus. And so for a while I would identify as somebody who's like, oh, I have to be careful because my kidneys are bad. Like, I was too young to be saying that stuff, you know, but when you're diagnosed with lupus as a young kid, and this happens, it happened to me, it happened to a friend that I had, it happens to people, you know, I think that the approach, the treatment should be the healing modalities that I like try to bring to this show, and it should be that right away, you know. But the ugly part of our world is that, like, we don't really have a lot of access to mental health treatment. So the reality is, because I always want to say, like, well, it wouldn't matter if we didn't have childhood trauma, but like we do, and we have generational trauma and all of these things. So we do need these things in our society, like therapists and stuff, to come in and help people right when they need help. I had more access to, like, the drugs that they gave me in the health center at UCSD than I did to the, like, 1 or 2 or 3 therapists that we had on staff for our whole college. And so what I needed was treatment for all the stuff that I talked to you about that came right before college, you know. I was a bright, sprightly kid. I wasn't sick yet. I had all that trauma and that stuff, you know. Maybe I had some, I guess that's not entirely true. I had, like, real early childhood trauma. So, like, I did start kind of seeing symptoms of stuff like early in college, or like the summer before that. But since I'm feeling a little bit like there's 5 different directions I could go, I'm going to take a break right now.
Traditional TV is going away. Hollywood is starting to fade. People are demanding real stories from real people. Our voices are now being heard in our own way. Podcasts, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok Live are becoming the norm. Internet TV has now reached the highest demand in human history. Social media shows is now the new media of the century.
Welcome to social media shows. Have you been watching social media shows recently? Of course you have. We have been live streaming for 4 years across social media platforms. We produce over 70 shows with over 1,000 episodes. In the process, we've helped over 100 creators realize their dreams and start their own show. We give platforms to promote your business. If you are an artist, if you have an event, if you are entrepreneurs, or if you have a story. If you haven't done it yet, go ahead and subscribe and follow us on major social media platforms. And if you have a great idea of a show, join us. social media shows can help you produce and live stream your own show. Let us help you make your dream become a reality.
Hey everybody, welcome back. This is our last segment of today's show, Mental Melodies, with your host here, Carmynn Bradley. I've been talking about a lot of things, and sometimes I know what the main point is, and sometimes I don't know until the end, but that's kind of the gist of what I was, not the gist. I don't know, I just keep going back to that speech on Saturday, and I guess in a way, again, I was thinking about, there's all these things I need to say, and it needs to be I need more time to say them, and I feel that way about, I don't know, I often, I guess, feel all I need to do is just be here, and what needs to be said will be said, and I'm just this vessel for things that need to be said. But there's I think there's two sides to it, because there's two sides to everything, because I think what this is showing me right now is how I have these two parts. Every human has these two parts where they have the fact that they are the universe experiencing itself as a human. I say that, and I know that sounds voodoo-y to some people, but it's the same thing that we learn in church. God made us in our image. What's the difference? I was saying on Saturday, for me, religion just doesn't work. I grew up in a household where religion was used as an excuse. I have memories of seeing my mom getting beaten by my stepfather, and then I have memories of him taking me on a little field trip by myself to a parking lot to tell me why it was my mom's fault. I'm sorry, but no. My mom is 5'2". She's negative 100 pounds. That woman does not let herself settle into any size bigger than a 4 or 6. This man was 5'11". He had a black belt in karate. There ain't no way that I can say that in that situation that, I don't know, I have this voice in my head that's well, women can be toxic too. And this is true. But there are specific instances where it's there is a very clear abuser and a very clear abusee. And I watched that happen, And so for me, in my life, I've gotten into relationships, and I've been violent. I've been with a man who was violent, and I've been able to take responsibility and walk away from situations like that. But there are a lot of people that get into it where they can't walk away from it, and they get sucked into it, for a really, really, really long time. And so kind of a conclusion that I came to on Saturday was just that I just have to own that. I can't keep saying nah, it's it works for me. It just doesn't work for me. But I like using the things that I learned in order to speak to audiences that also grew up with that same language. But I see that language all over. I see how, the Bible and Buddhism are similar in the fact that when you take away all the nonsense that religion is and that churches are, and that ideas about what women are supposed to be, and the rules that got written into this book that God gave us, the one book. There are a million books. Take it from a reader. There are a million books. And I think every author is leaning into this part of them that's I have this knowing, I have this knowledge. I've learned that love matters more than anything. I can see the patterns in society, and I see what's wrong. That's what an author is, what a speaker is. Let's argue that I was a part of the Toltec community 5 different lifetimes ago, and now I'm just some kid named Carmynn who was why is it that I can tell that how I'm growing up doesn't make any sense? That's who I was from a really young age, I've talked about this before, and this is kind of coming to the conclusion, I think, of, what I was kind of emphasizing on Saturday and what I'm emphasizing now about me and my gifts, and why it matters to me to just be in the moment and to lean into that, because I felt almost tasked with it as a kid, where I was the truth teller. But at the same time, it wasn't like I knelt down and my ancestors were tell the truth about these things. That's not how it happened. For me, it was just I had a very strong conviction as a kid. I felt very convicted about, if I see this and this is happening, and somebody asked me about it, let's say it was a social worker or a teacher or whatever, why would I lie? What does it do for me to lie, And when I went into my court case when I was 17, I get this story, and this just again validates my point that there are victims, and when you're a kid, you're the victim. I'm sorry, but that's just true. And this is how it happened for me. I had a math final, and my math teacher called me, and I called him because I was called into court that day. I had to testify against my stepfather on the day of my math final, senior year of high school. And I called my math teacher, and I'm crying because I'm like, I'm gonna miss the test. Like, if you don't know by now how important that was to me, then I need to talk about it more. But I really liked school, and I really liked learning, and I liked all that, you know, and I wanted to be there for the test so I could show you what I learned and what I had worked hard for, you know, and again, with that external validation. But anyway, I told my math teacher what I had to do and why I couldn't make it, and he ended up averaging all of my test scores, and I got an A in the class because I got an A on every test. And so it was this nice, like, beautiful story, but what it was at that time was even more valuable than I'm making it sound right now. And I think it's just because it was so far back, but like, that was an angel in that moment, just being like, bro, like, you've already done the work. Like, the final exam is just a thing we have to do because that's what teachers have to do the last week of school. Because if teachers don't give final exams the last week of school, then they're pieces of shit. That's how they feel. That's not true, but that's how we feel. Oh man, I'm like in a passion rant, and okay, so I guess this all comes down to like the voice, you know, and how like I feel like my voice is so much a part of my identity and who I am, you know, and it's like we all have all of it. We all have I'm doing this because I'm thinking of chakras, because when I think of the voice, I think of like an energy center, and I think of how my voice has been blocked by trauma, and how like for me that was so awful, particularly because I am so much a vocal person. Like, I am a speaker, I am a singer, I am an artist, like all these things. And so when my voice was shot, like, it closed the door for a lot of those things for me. But I feel like even from the beginning, even though that was true, like I was always trying. That's a thing. Like, you know, when I think about that, what the kind of story I shared about how I was like the truth teller as a kid, you know, I think about how even though this goes back to like the two stories thing, like even though there was all this trauma, and even though I've shared a lot today and in past, you know, episodes about stuff I've been through or stuff I've done because of mental illness or like patterns that I've had, there's also this story that is also just as true about this girl who has always been, like, tenacious is the word my mom uses to describe me, but she's always been tenacious, and she's always been articulate, and she's always been aware, and she's always been intuitive, and she's always been a fighter. And so like when I first look at the story of like lupus and mental illness, I see a girl who was like thrown down, like crumpled, you know, like I'm in that box and I can't get out of that box for a really long time. Reason being is when mental illness is really intense, it comes from intense trauma, right? So like you can be depressed in the morning. I was depressed this morning. I was like, but it didn't mean that it was for months at a time, or it didn't mean that it was forever, or that I have to identify as a depressed person, or that I need to take Prozac. It just meant that I had a moment where I needed to rest and I needed to be sad. But I had a moment where I needed to rest and I needed to be sad for like a decade. And that is because of childhood trauma, right? So, but I see the story that way. I see it as like Carmynn being victimized, you know? So again, back to that story, like what happened after the math teacher thing is what the tools my stepfather used to try and win that case was he tried to defame my character as a kid. Like, it sounds so stupid thinking about it now, but it was so serious back then, and he was so serious, where he used the same exact argument that he used to use to me when he would take me in the car after like a fight he had with my mom and blame it on my mom. He was doing the same thing, because when I was 17, I was no longer a kid. Like, that is what happens, you know, we do grow up, and a lot of us in situations like that are like, fuck that, and we walk away. And so the person who is so used to being in control, my stepfather, in that case, like, I became an enemy because it was no longer relevant for him to pretend that he loved me or that he cared, you know? And so then it was like, Carmynn did it and she's a bad kid and all of these things. And that simply wasn't true. Like, ask anybody who knew me at that age and like what I was known for. And it wasn't being like a brat or even rebellious. Like, I'm a rebel now because the world made me that way. But back then I was like a good kid, you know? I remember a teacher saying, like, he called me like the quiet kid in the corner, and I would like listen, and then I would take copious notes, and my tongue was always out because I was always concentrated. But I've always been the person also, and this is something that's come out recently with people seeing me who, like, I do stay quiet, I observe. Maria talks about being like this, you know, but when I have something to say, I say it. And so there's been like periods of that, you know, in childhood where I'd be quiet, I would observe, and then when I had a moment to say something, I would say it. And I feel like now, again, back to like moments, I have a moment now that's like longer and stronger, and my voice is more open, and so I get to say more, and I get to say all of it, and I get to say everything that I want to say, and I finally get to like be who I am, and that's a really cool, beautiful thing, you know. So at the end of my speech on Saturday, I went back to the thing that my brother said at Christmas. Like, I think it might have been his last Christmas actually when he told me that, and he said it as a joke, but I mean it seriously, that like my presence is your present, just as you should feel that your presence is a gift. Like we are all blessings, you know. And so anyway, that's it. That's me for today, and I'll see you very soon.
Lost, lonely, or maybe even a little bit loony? I talk about these things on my show and how to help them. Mental Melodies, broadcasting live every Monday through Friday at 4 p.m. and every Saturday at 11.